walking in a country road, and I've been chasing after my shadow.
Welcome back to the Camino Podcast, episode 109. I'm Dave Whitson.
Nobody asked me my name.
It's mid-January 2026 now. I hope you all enjoyed Global Camino 2026. I got in some very soggy miles on the Washington coast with a very nonplussed dog. But it's the thought that counts. And besides, I'll be somewhere warmer and hopefully drier in a couple weeks when Sandy Brown and I travel south to California for a series of pilgrim events. After an initial solo presentation in Medford, Oregon at the local REI on January 23, Sandy and I will be together in Sacramento, Oakland, Pismo Beach, Thousand Oaks, Burbank, Mission Viejo, and San Diego. Many of these events are being hosted by local chapters of the American Pilgrims, and some require or request advanced registration. You can find the full details on davewhitson.com or through your local organization. Hope to see some of you at one of these events. By the way, apologies, audio quality remains suboptimal. Microphone, I've tried just about everything to get it to work again, and it's causing me trouble, but I will persevere, and thanks for your forbearance. Okay, a few episodes back, we took a close look at the Via di Francesco through central Italy. Today, we're headed back to that area, focusing on the route I followed to the Francesco, and also the one that I transferred to afterward. We're focused as well on two headlining saints. Up first is the Cammino di San Benedetto, the Way of Saint Benedict. The Benedetto is roughly 300 kilometers and broken into 16 stages, running from Norcia in Umbria to the old Abbey of Monte Cassino in Lazio. It also then follows the course of Benedict's life, including a major stop in the town of Subiaco, where he performed much of his best work. The route is quite young, around 15 years old, but it has a solid infrastructure in place, featuring a group of friends of the Camino who offer exemplary hospitality along the way. The walking is great, rugged at times for sure, and often through gorgeous mountain terrain. Waymarking is quite reliable. This is a walk that is fully formed and ready for more pilgrims. After that, our attention turns to the Cammino di Sant'Antonio, the Way of St. Anthony. While Anthony's historic route through Italy technically begins in Sicily, where the boat crashed, and you'll see stickers for the Cammino di Sant'Antonio posted further south as the route organizers work their way onward, the established Camino is situated around Padua in northeast Italy, with routes coming to that shrine from Gemona del Friuli in the north and La Verna in the south. Heading northward from La Verna, the route remains quite mountainous as it pushes through the Apennines before it flattens out in Bologna. Passing through the Po Valley, it remains almost completely hill-free through Ferrara and onward to Padua. Hills only resume in earnest as you make your way closer to Gemona del Friuli and catch the far outer ripples of the Dolomites. It never becomes genuinely mountainous on that northern section, though. Anthony's Way is roughly as old as Benedict's, but it lacks the same level of infrastructure. The waymarking is quite good, but pilgrim accommodations are limited and uneven. Some parishes and other religious complexes accept pilgrims, so there are some options, but not enough to keep you affordably sheltered every night. The route, though, has significant momentum behind it and continues to push into new areas, adding alternatives that link to other towns touched by Anthony. I'm joined for the discussion by several pioneers, among the first native English speakers to tackle these routes. Paul Granville of Brisbane, Australia, is up first. He's a prolific walker of Italian cammini, including the Cammino di San Benedetto. After that, Ellen and Mike Leland of Larkspur, Colorado, USA, who I suspect were the very first Americans on the Cammino di Sant'Antonio, reflect on their walk from Gemona to Padua. The Via Francigena and Via di Francesco justly get plenty of attention when people are thinking about pilgrimage in Italy. But there are more options out there. drawing only a relative trickle of pilgrims. Talked before about the Materano and the Via Francigena Sud. Well, here's two more to add to the list. If you're looking for beautiful walking, historical scenery, and plenty of solitude, these are worth considering. Paul Granville is a prolific pilgrim from Brisbane, Australia. He documents his walks online at paulscamino.com. Paul, thanks very much for speaking with me today about the Camino di San Benedetto.
I'm glad to be with you today.
You have done more walking in Italy than the vast majority of pilgrims, especially non-Italian pilgrims. The Benedetto, the Via Francigena, the Magna Via Francigena, the Via dei Dei, and the Via Romea Germanica. Why? What have you found most enjoyable about walking in Italy, and what keeps you coming back?
Well, the reason is that my wife's parents were Italian immigrants.
Okay.
My mother-in-law actually never, ever learned to speak English very well. So I saw it as an opportunity to learn a foreign language because I've always wanted to do that. So I've spoken Italian for a long time. And we go to Italy every year. And my wife has a lot of family there still, even though she was born in Australia. So when I decided to do a pilgrimage walk, doing it in Italy seemed a good option because for a start, I wasn't far from what you could call almost second home. And I was a bit worried, oh, can I do it? How am I going to go? And it's much easier to go by train rather than plane. So that's why I chose my first walk in Italy. And I love talking to people along the way. So I can do that in Italian a bit, not quite as good in Spanish, but I get a lot out of that.
It's great. Yeah. And they don't expect foreigners to speak any Italian. So it kind of shocks them when you can put together a sentence.
Yeah, and in Italy, in the little villages, not many people speak Italian, you know. In the big tourist cities, different thing altogether. But in the little villages, they really, really like it when you can speak to them in Italian.
The Camino di San Benedetto, which we're going to spend most of our time talking about today, draws many fewer pilgrims than some of the other routes in Italy. You've walked two of the more popular ones with the Via Francigena, the Via dei Dei.
Mm-hmm.
The Via Francesco also draws a lot of people. You haven't done
Yeah.
that one. What drew you to the Benedetto? What was the appeal?
Well, we now have our daughter who lives in Amsterdam, and now we've got a little grandson. So you can imagine when we go to Europe, where we spend most of our time. And also, I leave my wife alone for a long period in the long walks. So I've started to do shorter ones. So this one was just 2 weeks, sound perfect. The other thing was it's a part of Italy that I was completely ignorant of. I've never been to any of those places. So I thought, hey, this is a great way to discover a new bit of Italy.
I hadn't been to Umbria either. For someone who's never been, can you just sort of describe in broad brushstrokes what Umbria is like?
Well, they call it in Italian the green heart of Italy. So it's totally has no coastline. And it's a bit like Tuscany, but it's got its own character. So many beautiful hilltop towns and forests that it's really a beautiful part of Italy. But you walk, a lot of the walk is in Lazio, which is the next region south, centered on Rome. But, you know, on this walk, you can be within 30, 40 kilometers of Rome, but you're in a different world. The people even speak really strange dialect at times in little villages. You probably get your meal for half the price you would in Rome, you know. So.
And the pilgrims out there who have walked the Via Francigena, they've passed through Lazio. But I found the Lazio of the San Benedetto to be more verdant.
Yeah.
Lazio on the Via Francigena often feels a bit scorched, a bit flatter, and
Yeah.
I am partial to the Umbrian section.
Well, you're right up in the mountains. It's a fair bit of climbing and a lot of hill towns. So it is a different part of Lazio. Yeah.
The Benedetto, as I said, very lightly traveled. We had similar experiences, having an overlap with maybe one other pilgrim, certainly single
Yes.
digits. And one of the reasons that it is so lightly traveled is that it's pretty new, the founder of the
Yeah.
route. And it's interesting because a lot of routes have centuries, millennia old history. You're not finding
Yeah.
a singular founder. But the Benedetto has a founder, Simone Frignani, who researched it, wrote the book. I believe he even like trademarked it. And
Ah,
and all of that happened over the last 15 years or so. Young roots sometimes struggle with infrastructure, things like waymarking, services, accommodations. How did you find the Benedetto on those elements?
well, the first thing that pops into my mind is my credential or credenziale. If I look at that, every stamp is an interesting, purpose-made one.
Hmm.
When I walked on some other Italian routes, the best I could do was the commercial ones. So just that shows you that people along the way are really got behind it because it brings money into their little towns. Signposting I found was excellent. The people haven't walked much in Italy. It's not like in Spain where you get all the albergues. You don't find all these purpose pilgrim dormitory type accommodation. It's all Airbnb, booking.com, or directly in getting in contact with people. So I didn't have any trouble with accommodation either. Maybe it's a bit dearer than sleeping in a bunk in a dormitory, but you have to put up with that. That's one of the downsides, maybe.
I don't know if this was the case when you got your credential. I've walked it a little bit more recently, but along with the credential came a sheet called the Amici del Camino, the Friends of the Camino. And so it listed the accommodation, pilgrim accommodation in each stage along the
Yeah,
way, along with the
yeah,
phone number. So right from the start, you had, and there's other places you could stay. You could go find something on booking.com in some of the towns. But over
yeah,
and
yeah,
over again, these were people who were recruited by the founder, who developed accommodation often within their homes and are committed to the mission of taking care of pilgrims.
yeah. Well, they're all in the guidebook as well. I'm not sure if the guidebook is in English or not, but
It's now available in English as well, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Probably at the time it wasn't when I did it.
It's a great little network, and one of the things that's interesting about it is because it's so less traveled, they're not focused as much on dorms that can hold 10 people. There's a lot of basically B&B style accommodation where the rooms are, more comfortable than some of the dorms I've stayed in elsewhere, and yet still very, very affordable.
Had some great breakfasts as well,
Yeah.
because Italian breakfast is usually a little pastry and a short black coffee. But some places went out of the way to ask me, and it's really good. So I like a good breakfast.
I will say one of the things that kills me about travel in Italy is the prepackaged toast, which I just
Ah,
can't
yeah,
deal with.
yeah, and that's impossible. Yeah. Well, the other thing about walking in Italy is if you go to any little supermarket, they always have a deli section, and they make you up a fantastic sandwich you can carry and eat along the way under a shady tree.
Yeah. And there's, a number of days as well where there's stops along the way where you can also buy
Yep.
food. So it's pretty well set up.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. He's done a good job.
You walked the route the correct way. I walked it in reverse. So you got
Uh,
you got the full experience of following Benedict's life. You started where the route starts in Norcia.
hmm
I mean, I had certain ideas in my mind. I knew that there had been an earthquake in 2016. I knew the town
Yeah.
had been badly damaged. I didn't appreciate just how much of that damage persisted even now.
Mhm.
What were your impressions of Norcia when you started your walk there?
Yeah, well, it's a few years ago, about 3 years ago. So many houses being propped up. There was a whole street of shops outside the walls in demountable wooden buildings,
Still there.
like a little suburb outside the walls where people were living. But I just about 2 weeks ago, I saw a news item that the basilica is reopened. So
Finally.
the massive church, but that's incredible, that they actually go to all that trouble and rebuild it with all the traditional skills. So just for everybody, there's a big church, the Basilica of San Benedetto, right in the middle of town, and that's like the center of the town, like the big churches always are in Italy, and it's reopened. So they're hoping it'll bring more visitors.
I hope so. Because, yeah, it's great that that has been recovered and still
Yeah,
everything else around it is wrapped in scaffolding and
yeah,
held up with support beams and still some piles of rubble around the margins. And yeah, all of the temporary facilities, the temporary housing, a decade on, it's still in use.
yeah.
Earthquakes in Italy, man. It's just like it's hard to escape having your town destroyed by an earthquake every 100 years or so.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately in some parts of Italy, it's an opportunity for corruption with the
Mm,
money disappearing that's supposed to go into that. I'm not saying that happened in Umbria, but it has happened in other places.
yeah, that's an issue for sure. So you've walked all of these different routes, not just in Italy, but also Spain and Portugal.
Yeah,
As you think about where the Benedetto slots in among all of those, are there any distinct qualities that stand out where you say, like, this is quintessentially central to the Benedetto experience?
yeah. Well, I think there's just a string of beautiful hilltop towns, and there's also all sorts of things unexpected. So you get to the top of a mountain, and there's a Roman arch that I understand used to be a customs point 2,000 years ago. And you come across things like this, beautiful monasteries. I stayed in one. So I think in a compact thing, you're only talking 300 kilometers, it's just so much to see, and also the beautiful mountain scenery. So I'd say that's it special, a lot in a small space.
I walked this and the Francesco in succession. And one of the things that it made me think about is it's easy to just sort of compress everything down to the similar sounding Hilltown label.
Yeah,
But the hill towns in on the Via di Francesco, you're often walking through a valley, and then there is this singular hill, this spire sort of topped with a town, and it's very
yeah,
distinct. And then you can go up top and you can see the valley in all directions. And certainly that sometimes happens on the Benedetto, but often these are not isolated hills, but part of these larger mountain chains. So these are hill towns, but within a more rugged context, I think.
yeah. You're very close to the peak of the Apennines, which goes all the way down Italy.
You were already just alluding to this, but let's get even more specific. Do you have, like, looking back, a stage, a section of the walk that stands out in your memory as particularly primo, like you really, really enjoyed that day?
Yeah, I was thinking there's one from Colle Pardo to Casamari. Colle Pardo is a lovely town, beautiful little medieval town. Then you follow this old medieval road that goes up to a big monastery in a place called Trisulti. And you can see the road as you go up, it slowly gets more and more bad condition. So it ends up rocks. But you can imagine that you were a pilgrim 700, 800 years ago and going up this old road. And that tops it this magnificent Cistercian abbey, Trisulti, which has gone through a lot of problems in recent years, government owned, with a magnificent pharmacy from the 17th century, I think it is, perfect condition. And I met some monks there who came from Casamari, where I stayed the night. So you end up there, you get to Casamari, and you look at the Abbey Church, and you say, "Hey, am I in Italy?" Because it looks like it was lifted out of Burgundy and dropped in the middle of Italy, which basically it was, architecturally speaking. The Cistercians there have a very good community. There's about 20 of them. Other monasteries have stayed, there's about 4 or 5, usually average age 90, but this is a very vibrant community. And they always like you to go to the Vespers, where you have a go at singing Gregorian chant. So here I was trying to sing Gregorian chant with the monks, and then a thunderstorm hit. So you're in this church that's built some probably 13th century with all the lighting outside, the monks with their cows singing a Gregorian chant. Now that's pretty atmospheric. And just an interesting thing, I took the time to have a read through the rule of St. Benedict, and it said, if a pilgrim visits a monastery, and they follow the Benedictine rule, the Cistercians, then the pilgrim has dinner with the abbot. And what they said to me, oh, there's a pizza place across the road. See you later.
You got to adapt to the times. So
Yeah, yeah. So they don't strictly follow the Benedictine rule in every way.
I had that monastery and the pharmacy on my short list as well. What an incredible place. At this point, I have been to so many medieval and Renaissance churches and cathedrals that to some degree I've probably seen every permutation on every religious
Yeah,
style, but I had not been in a space like that anywhere. And that sticks in my memory vividly.
yeah,
It's interesting to think about how the direction we walk influences our perception and our memory. For me, Arpino stands out as a major highlight. Arpino is the birthplace of Cicero and Agrippa, a pristine center, but it also has the old Arpino up on top, including
Yeah,
some 8th century BC stonework arches. And so for me, I came into Old Arpino. The Tower of Cicerone was open. I went up to the top. I saw New Arpino down below, descended into it, spent the day just in the piazza while there was a market happening. Just kind of like your experience in Casamari, where everything combines to just construct the perfect moment.
yeah. Well, you know what you missed then, don't you?
What's that?
The incredibly tough climb up to the old town, the old megalithic town. That was tough.
I mean, would you rather do those steep steps going up or going down? It's not good in either direction.
Yeah, it's true. Different difficulty.
One other that I'll mention, did you overnight in Castel di Torre?
Yeah, there's a very special place to stay there with a little room looking out over the lake. It could be the same spot with the fountain out the front.
It's incredible. The hospitality that I received there. I went into these places not always knowing what was going to come my way. And I arrived in this incredible pilgrim accommodation just coming in right off the road. And I should mention that Castel di Torre is not just a hill town. I mean, it is a steep, rocky little hill jutting up out of this man-made lake from damming a river. And so it towers high over almost 360-degree lake views. And I arrived, and the woman hosting me had left a snack box with pizza and biscotti and other things, and then showed up later. I had no idea with dinner with like a three-course meal. Just an unbelievable experience all the way around.
Yeah. Well, I stayed at a little place. It's a restaurant with rooms above
Okay.
and a square with a fountain. The big climb up to the town, and it was about 40 degrees with a heat wave, which is like 100, is it?
Oh,
In
yeah.
Fahrenheit?
Oh, 40 Celsius. Whew.
And I come into the place, and I sweat a lot. I was totally wet. And she in Italian said to me, "I did just have a wash in the fountain." I said, "No." She said, "Oh, is that sweat?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Oh."
I really like that she genuinely thought that you were washing in the fountain like a medieval pilgrim.
Well, I was so wet. I just sweat so much, you know. And it's unfortunately I walked in a heat wave the whole time.
Wow. Yeah, because I was there in early spring, so it was still quite
Yeah, it's
cool most of
beautiful.
the time. Yeah, very different situations. Before I made the walk, I had wanted to visit Monte Cassino for years.
Mm.
Monte Cassino is the end point. It comes as you have a great day of walking along the ridge of a series of hills overlooking this valley below, and then Monte Cassino is just perched on the very last hill. You've walked a lot of pilgrimages, you've arrived at a lot of shrines, a lot of destinations. How did it feel, Monte Cassino, as the finish line for this pilgrimage?
Well, you know, the thing that I found most moving wasn't actually the monastery itself. So you come up from behind, and the first thing you see is the Polish War Cemetery.
Yeah.
It's huge. And the Poles were the first in. The Polish flag was the first flag to be raised when they took the Nazi flag down. And they just lost so many lives. It's so moving just to see this huge war cemetery there. And the place itself, one of the big things for me was seeing all the bits of rubble all around the garden, which were pieces of the original monasteries. Like you might see a head of a statue or a bit of a column. That was very moving as well, just to imagine what was there before. But the place itself, in Italian, they say it was rebuilt come era dov'era, as it was where it was. And that's what they did. So, you know, it's all this incredible workmanship, beautiful mosaics, wonderful, wonderful place to visit, to end. And the other big surprise is when you get there, you look down at the town and you don't realize how high up you are because you're gradually, from behind, gradually climbing up the ridge. And it's a steep climb down. So the position is incredible. And that comes as a surprise when you come from behind.
This is one of those things where I don't know how Australia approaches its history education. From an American perspective, you would only think that the Allies made it onto continental Europe through Normandy, France in World
Yeah,
War II. There's no discussion about the Italian front.
no,
And so walking through this area and seeing the massive price that was paid by Italians, by the Allies, I mean, it was just an absolute death trap surrounding Monte Cassino. I mean, it was literally called Death Valley.
yeah. And it was all, I think, all through a tragic era.
Yeah,
In fact, the German, I don't know if you've read this, the German general in charge there was a lay Benedictine. So the last thing he would have done was put that place at risk. And it was a misinterpretation, I think, of intelligence that led to it all.
yeah, the belief that the Nazis had stashed a bunch of supplies, troops up in the Abbey when in fact nothing was there, and the
Yeah,
Allies blew it to smithereens, and there was nothing there.
yeah, yeah, very tragic.
And yet, walking through it today, you would not believe at all that that was the case 70, 80 years ago, because it looks exactly how you would imagine this ancient abbey would look.
So it just shows you that the great love the Italians have for their history and culture,
Mhm.
that they'll go to all that trouble to rebuild something. Here we'd put up probably a modern spa hotel or something. Oh, well, move on.
Yeah, let's be grateful for a moment that they didn't install a modern high-rise hotel there around the margins. So this is the way of Saint Benedict, and Saint Benedict is obviously then the focus, the thematic hook for this Camino. It starts in his birthplace in Norcia, goes through the center of his greatest works in Subiaco, and then it concludes where he did in Monte Cassino. Did you have any interest in Benedict coming into this walk?
Well, I did a bit of research because it was based on it. So I did know a bit about it. What I found interesting that there's actually another place, Vicovarium. I don't know if you went through there.
I did.
I stayed at an ex-monastery on top of it, and you go around and look underneath, and there's all these caves where Benedict lived before he'd come up with this idea of a rule organizing monks in communities. And then you go to Subiaco, where the caves have all been converted into this most unbelievable monastery with incredible frescoes, which is probably the high point of the whole walk. And you can compare the two, see the caves were never touched and the ones which have been turned into this incredible monastery. And that's interesting. You can see that such a primitive life those monks had living in the caves from the ones at Vicovarium that have never been touched. And then this place unique in the world when you get to Subiaco.
And you can stay in Santa Scholastica's monastery as well. So you can
Yeah,
really
yeah,
just immerse yourself in the narrative.
yeah, yeah. There's actually a connection in Western Australia, one of our states. There's a town called Nunocha, and there's a place called Subiaco because the Benedictines went there, I think, about 150 years ago as missionaries. So all the names are familiar to us, although we pronounce them in an English way, differently. And Nausea and Subiaco. So that's the way they're pronounced. So there's a connection there too, back with Australia. The Benedictines bought the place names with them.
As you did the research, as you made the walk, did you find any personal connection or thing that was particularly drawing your attention about Benedict's life?
I guess there's the fact that after all these years, there are all these legends around him that you wonder, they're based in some sort of truth. Like a Vicovary, I think there was another monk he had arguments with who gave him some poison wine, I think the story was.
Yeah.
Glass miraculously broke, so he couldn't drink it. So it makes you think about the way those sort of stories develop over the years and what actually happened when you look at the caves and trying to imagine them all there.
The thing that stood out to me related to that was, there are all these different miracle stories, all these different legends that surround saints, and some of them are pretty like exciting, some of them are dramatic, some of them are even a little bit spicy. And it felt like the legends about Benedict are all just kind of mundane and boring, like
Yeah,
a farmer where the head of his sickle like flew off and went into a lake and he looked really sad. And so Benedict had him put the handle back in the lake, and then the blade was attached to it, and then the guy was happy. Like that's the kind of legend that circulates about Benedict.
Yeah, but he's called, I think, the patron of Europe. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think that's because he gave rise to institutionalized monasticism.
Hmm.
And that's where a lot of European culture was preserved during times of strife and difficulty and war.
There's no question that, yeah, his legacy is central to the development of European history. And it's great that this route exists to spotlight that.
Yeah,
So you've done all these walks, and the natural question then is, what's the next one? Where are you headed next?
yeah, good question. I had thought of heading south from Rome on the southern Francigena route.
Hmm.
But when you look at it, there's a lot of asphalt on that route, and my feet tingle after a long day walking on bitumen. And the other idea I've always had was to walk from Toledo to Santiago, which cuts across about 5 different routes. You just keep hopping on, they intersect. And so I've got that one in the back of my mind as well. So yeah, haven't quite decided yet. The other thing is we spend a lot of time in Bologna, and I like being able to walk out of the front door. And there's a route from Bologna that takes you up to Laverna, up in the mountains on the Franciscan route. So I could do that and then head further south. There's a certain attraction to walking out the front door.
The Camino di Sant'Antonio has also laid claim to that as well. So
Yeah, well, that goes through Bologna. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah,
I've done like a day here and there, well, because we stay in Bologna when we're in Italy. So I've done bits of it.
yeah. Well, there's always more to be done, and the beauty of Italy is that you can't throw a stone without hitting at least the local pilgrimage sites. So there's plenty of options.
And the other thing is, the cities in Italy now are just so full of tourists that you're getting all the anti-tourist reaction. When you go on a pilgrimage walk in Italy, it's a different country. You're unlikely to see any tourists. You might see a few in some towns, but most of the time you're probably the only foreigner in town that night.
It's great. Yeah, I did not see any other Americans the vast majority of time when I was walking there. All right, Paul, this was great. I'm so appreciate that you did the walk, that you write about these walks, because as I said before we started the conversation, there are just very few English speaking pilgrims who travel on some of these Italian cammini. And it's just incredibly helpful to have documented accounts available online so that people can discover what's out there.
Yeah, I'm really happy when people find them useful because that's why I write them.
And it's all there on paulscamino.com. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Mike and Ellen Leland, thank you for talking with me. I didn't think I was going to be able to find anyone to talk about the Camino di Sant'Antonio within English. So I'm curious, let's just start right with this. How the heck did you end up on the Camino di Sant'Antonio? There are not a lot of pilgrims out there.
Well, we originally thought we would do the Way of St. Mark from Lake Garda to Venice,
Wow.
but that's a rather new route also. And I read that it wasn't well marked and it was a lot of highway walking. So I started looking for alternatives and I was just floating around on mappy.cz and saw the route for the Sant'Antonio. And we were going to be in that side of Italy. So we definitely wanted to do something over on that side. And just decided, let's do this one. I love St. Anthony. I was excited to go to Padua. And that's how we made the decision.
It was kind of the geographical pull that you were looking for something that was in the Northeast Italy area.
We were looking at the Veneto. I thought the Dolomites were probably too ambitious for me. We just visited the Dolomites, but we didn't hike through them. We wanted to be on the Venice, Trieste side of Italy. We did know that.
So it's similar in some ways to the Via di Francesco. So nobody knows about the Sant'Antonio. Some people know about the Via di Francesco. And the thing about the Via di Francesco is that you have the main shrine, Assisi, right in the center, and then you have northward and southward routes extending from there. And the same is true with the Sant'Antonio, where Padua is right in the center, and there's a southward route that goes down to Laverna and kind of connects with the Francesco. And there's a northward route that comes from Gemona del Friuli, which is also very, very new. It's the newer part of the Sant'Antonio. So was it also primarily geography playing the part there in opting for the northward route, which you followed from Gemona, or what else was the allure?
Well, I think the main one was because that was starting in Gemona for us was where St. Anthony had started when he was moving back at the end of his life. I guess he'd received a vision that this was it for him and he needed to return to Padua. And so we kind of wanted to retrace his footsteps from Gemona to Padua. So that was kind of driving us. And that's why we chose that particular section and that particular direction.
And Gemona is held up as an important site in particular because it has the first church dedicated to Anthony, originating in 1219.
Right.
Unfortunately, pretty much the whole thing was flattened when the huge earthquake hit in 1976. But take me there. Take me to that starting point when you went to Gemona del Friuli and you were trying to connect with Anthony right from the start. What do you recall?
I'm going to start, but Ellen has a really good story about a lost item that she had in Gemona because St. Anthony,
He's the patron saint.
Specialties
is the patron saint of lost things. But anyway, we'd gone up to the church, and there's actually the church inside the church, right? So there's a little bit of a corner of the church that was destroyed in the earthquake that's inside the new modern church, right? That was pretty interesting. The first time I think we both seen anything like that. We'd taken a train, Udine, and then a bus from Udine to Gemona, and Ellen had left her phone on the bus.
Oof.
So I'll let Ellen take it from here.
all the reservations and things like that on my phone. So I panicked, of course, and then looked to see if the bus was going to come around again. And it was. A woman who spoke English helped me call the lost and found to see if it had been turned in. There weren't a lot of people on the bus, so I thought, well, maybe it's still on the bus. So I watched for the bus to come around. When he stopped at the stop, I hopped on and asked him if I could look. Of course, he spoke no English, and my Italian is really bad. So it was sitting there. But in the meantime, I had prayed to St. Anthony. I'm like, St. Anthony, this is your home base. I'm sure you can find it. And it was just sitting on the seat where I had left it. So that was a good start. Good,
She learned an important lesson because when I walked my first Camino de Santiago in 2021, a couple years before, I had learned whenever you get up from a seat or whenever you always turn around and look, right?
Yeah.
If you've left anything. And I think I'd even said something like that to her on that particular bus ride, and she just didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so from then on out, I think we are both much better about turning around and looking, right? Because the last thing you want to do when you're on a pilgrimage is leave something behind and then have to go back on foot to get it, right? Nobody wants to do that. So.
And I was so excited that I had found it, but I hugged the bus driver.
I had a student once lose one of her two hiking shoes on the train from the airport as we were preparing to begin our walk. And that one didn't come back. Anthony wasn't in Switzerland at that point. He's based in Italy.
We went to the church to get our credentials. We were only, like the 30s. They had a booklet.
They had us set a guest book to give us and it was a gentleman who didn't speak English, but he was able to sort of mime what we needed to do. And he gave us our little credentials. We would get our stamps and we had to fill out. And we were in the 30s. So we were like 32, 33. So it was definitely very, very new, certainly compared to a lot of other places
It's a beautiful credential. The cover on it is just beautiful. The artwork.
Yeah, it's impressive. And as you were two of the first 30 or so walking the San Antonio from Gemona, you probably didn't see a whole lot of pilgrims out on the trail, did you?
Didn't.
No.
I actually saw one young man from the Czech Republic. He wasn't technically walking to San Antonio. He was actually walking to Rome. And I can't remember exactly what day it was, probably about halfway through. And there was a section that I was walking, and it was a series of switchbacks downhill. He had noticed me from a distance. He was behind me. He noticed me from a distance and was trying to catch up to me, but I was moving pretty quick. So what he tried to do is he started to bust through the brush in the middle of the S curves, right, to try and catch up. I heard some rustling in the brush ahead of me. And so this guy pops out of the woods there, wearing a pack. And obviously I could tell what he was all about. And he was in front of me and he kind of flagged me down. he spoke a decent amount of English, and so we started talking. But he said he'd noticed I had my scallop shell from the Camino de Santiago, and he noticed that from a distance, and so he was trying to catch up to me to talk to me. And so we ended up walking for a couple of miles together, maybe about 4 kilometers or so. He had to split off from me at one point, so we didn't walk beyond those first few miles. That was the only other walker we had that either one of us saw that entire 11 days that we walked.
Sometimes you'd see people walking their dogs, local people on the trail walking their dogs or whatever, but not a lot of pilgrims. And let me just say that on the San Antonio, I would walk until I didn't want to walk anymore, and then I would find the bus or the train. So he was alone sometimes, and I would just go on ahead and find the place where we were staying, check in, figure out what we were going to do for dinner, do laundry, those sorts of things.
Logistics. Very helpful for me.
It's great. Yeah, it's great to have someone doing that for you. I was in the same boat. I saw one pilgrim the whole time. He was a Dane. He was actually walking the Camino de Sant'Antonio, but you make a good point. The Sant'Antonio folks didn't reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of places where they overlap with other pilgrim roads, and the Via Romea, the Romea Strata, one of the German pilgrim roads to Rome, the Alemannia, runs right through here. So it overlaps at different points with the Sant'Antonio.
Yeah, I actually ran into probably a dozen bicyclists, right, that were bicycling from Austria, Germany down to Rome. That was a pretty common route, obviously farther, but they could move a lot more miles every day, right? So that was, and they seemed to be surprised that I was walking, right? That seemed to be a fairly common reaction when we would get to talking. But yeah, pilgrims were pretty few and far between.
Did it detract from the experience for you? You've both walked much more populated pilgrimage routes. What was it like to be completely on your own?
For me, it didn't. I'm a bit of an introvert. I like, using obviously the Camino de Santiago as an example, I like to walk by myself if I could on the Camino. I like to socialize in the evenings. That was always nice with the other pilgrims. But I find that if I would walk with somebody, I would tend to sort of focus on them and kind of miss what was going on around me. I would focus on my conversation with this other person, this other pilgrim. And so it was helpful for me to be able to fully experience the Camino or the walk if I was by myself. Ellen, I don't know if your experience is different.
On the day, honestly, what kind of mood I was in, what shape my feet were in, the weather. But I would agree, it was nice to round up with people in the evenings, maybe at dinner. But, well, I'm more extroverted than Mike is, but I think we both like meeting people from other countries and talking about their experiences and, how they've decided to walk a Camino or, what their life experience has been.
We walked a total of 11 days on the Sant'Antonio, and I think it was maybe 10. Ellen was with me, happened to be with me that day. When we got to the town that she was going to try to take the bus from,
the bus didn't stop there anymore, so I was out of luck.
So she was forced to continue walking, which wasn't super pleasant for her.
It was very hot.
Which wasn't as pleasant for me. But we were walking along, was probably like a local's bike path, I would say. It's probably a lot of the Sant'Antonio was bike path. And we ran into a mom and her 2 children. They're kind of out for a walk. Did we hear them speaking English or they heard us speaking English? And it turned out she was American and she was married to an Italian. And they were in Italy visiting her in-laws, and they were there for a month or 6 weeks. So we ended up chatting with them a bit, right? So you would run into sort of these random encounters with people along the way. Again, not necessarily pilgrims, but fairly interesting. And then they would always be somewhat surprised at what we were doing, right? It was just the pilgrimage culture wasn't, as embedded there, I guess. And so people didn't quite understand what we were up to until we explained it to them.
Yeah, you're a bit more of a spectacle here than you are on the Camino Portugues.
Absolutely.
So one place you did have a little bit of company was in the Ospedale di San Giovanni, authentic medieval pilgrim hospital built in 1199, refurbished 2008 in the village of San Tommaso, and a true highlight of the route. And it's the only reason that I know you two exist and that you walked. I looked in every pilgrim log trying to find someone from an English-speaking country. Never did until that night. And I know that was a special place for you as well. So describe this place, the Ospedale di San Giovanni.
found it again on Mappy, zooming in on Mappy. They have a little website, kind of like a blog, more or less, and it had contact information. So I emailed, said, hey, this is the date we think we'll be coming through. Would it be possible to make a reservation? So emailed back, said, sure, no problem. I got there first, and it's just amazing. It's stone, it's so old, but the renovation was done really well. And the night we were there was a local group that was going to drive up to Austria and then walk from Austria back to the Hospitale. And the architect, Mr. Del Piccolo, was one of the people that was there organizing it. And he's super interesting, and, talks a little bit about the renovations and trying to get the town on board with utilizing that church and the church and hostel, getting it up and running again. And like I said, the renovation, it's very simple, but it's beautifully done. The bathrooms are great. That's always my thing I look at. Is it clean? Have they had any reports of bed bugs? And what are the bathrooms like? So it checked all those boxes. They had a wonderful communal dinner while we were there. There were a couple of young people that spoke English. People spoke German. There was one guy who spoke Czech, so I could talk to him a little bit. And, everybody would kind of go around and talk, and this person would translate for that person. And it was just a lovely experience. And then we all got up the next morning and had breakfast, stood in the courtyard, said an Our Father, and they took off to Austria, and we continued on our way. And they invited us to go with them. And I know Mike was super disappointed, but when I walk, I make reservations for the whole trip before we leave home. I want to know where I'm sleeping every night. I want to know what my distance is going to be every day. And Mike is a little more loosey-goosey, and he can tell you about that. But it was just a lovely, lovely place. Somebody had a guitar, so we were singing after dinner. It was just great.
It was the end of our first day. I think it was a 15-mile day, and it was the first day, and it was fairly hot out. And I just remember when I got there, Ellen was already there. There were probably half a dozen people of the eventual, probably 20 that were there that night. It was a pretty big crowd. I think about half of them were there for the pilgrimage the next day from Linz, I believe it was Linz, Austria, back down to the Hospitale. But yeah, they invited us to go, and I thought that would have been kind of cool, right? But as Ellen said, she already had a reservation, so we couldn't really get at them at that point. But we probably wouldn't have done the Camino de San Antonio if we decided to go with them. But, no big deal. It was great. We had a good time with them. They're very friendly people, very nice people. It was really cool to meet the guy who was the architect, who kind of behind everything. And as Ellen said, he was a really interesting guy. So yeah, it was a very good way to kick off that particular walk for us, right? To have that sort of experience on the first night.
Yeah, I arrived there on a day when I think 4 to 5 inches of rain was in the forecast, along with heavy winds and lightning. I mean, it was a wild, wild day, but I found a window, got there early, and I spent a couple hours just sitting in the attached church, which was open and is just lined with frescoes. And then my hosts arrived and 2 others from the community came. So it was basically 3 hosts to just me hanging out for dinner. It's a great kitchen dining space, just the perfect place to spend a cold, rainy day. And yeah, I couldn't have been happier there. One of the challenges when you walk a new route, a route that doesn't have a lot of walkers, is that, of course, there's not going to be a great infrastructure in terms of pilgrim accommodation along the way. Did you have any other notable hospitality experiences on the Sant'Antonio?
In Vidor, we stayed at an agriturismo, and we got there on a Monday, and everything was closed. Even the grocery store is closed on Monday in this town.
Yeah.
So what were we going to do for dinner? Well, Luca, the son of the owners, he learned English by playing video games. So
he was a young guy in his 20s.
21, 22. And he spoke pretty good English because he plays online games with a lot of Americans. He said, you know what? I will just cook you dinner. So he made us the most incredible homemade tortelloni stuffed with sausage, just for the 2 of us, because we were the only ones staying there that night. He felt bad that he didn't have a prepared dessert, but his mother had made some cookies at some point. And so he brought out a plate of cookies, and they were the most delicious cookies, biscotti and just a variety of cookies. I raved about them. So the next morning, she had made a bag for us to take of these cookies. Her name was Valeria and his name was Luca. And they also had their own small Prosecco winery. And they greeted us at the door with a glass of their homemade Prosecco. And it was great. And you could buy it from them. They don't ship to the United States because they're not a big enough producer. But if there had been any way, if I'd had a wagon or something, I would have bought a case of their Prosecco. It was so good. But, with your backpack, you're already struggling to keep the weight down. And I probably didn't need alcohol.
That is worth noting, though, that this route does go through Prosecco country.
It does. And actually, Luca said that they were very happy to see us and to see Americans. This was, 2023? So
June of 22.
Had picked up again, but it hadn't really recovered from COVID. And he said that they normally get a lot of Swiss and German bicyclists on that Prosecco road, but the economy was bad up there. And with the COVID restrictions, having been lifted later in various places, they weren't getting the tourists that they normally got. So they were definitely very glad to see Americans out and about.
I was able to find 3 other pilgrim-focused accommodations, which felt pretty good on this stretch. Like you said, Mike, it was 10, 11 days of walking. In Gemona, the Franciscans at the church will put you up and bring you in for dinner. So that's an option. The nuns on the hilltop in Polcenigo, they have a little dorm space that pilgrims can stay in. And then there's a pilgrim group in Castelfranco Veneto that also has a space. So there's a few, it's not without, but they aren't easy to find. Like, it took me a lot of time to track those down. Otherwise, it would be a little bit pricier. But as you say, it's a beautiful place with a lot of good options for agriturismo and other sort of rural accommodations.
You mentioned Polcenigo. We stayed at the lodge in the state park there, up on top of the hill. It was great. And they had a restaurant in another building. You go down a hill and then back up a hill. It had amazing food. I had lamb that night. It was just amazing. But there's a variety of options. And since it's the two of us, we're not averse to, spending, I guess, a little more. But you can find great places, family-run places for 50, 60 euros a night that'll include breakfast. And there is no place in America for $75 where I would lay my head. Yeah, it's a completely different style of accommodation than what we're used to in the States.
And Polcenigo was remarkable to me because that was day 4. And to your story about the storm I was walking in the middle of a ridiculous hailstorm. I mean, the hail was only pea-sized, but I got hit once and it kind of rang my bell. But I was out in the middle of nowhere. And finally I was able to, after about maybe an hour of walking in just brutal downpour of hail, I was able to find an underpass right along one of the roads. And so I was able to hide out under there and was able to kind of stumble into Polcenigo, soaking wet from that hailstorm. And that was the only negative weather experience I had, but it was definitely memorable for sure.
So that probably didn't qualify as your favorite stretch of walking.
It was not.
What stands out in your memory as you look back? You sort of have that vision in your mind. You can see yourself back on this stretch. Where is it?
It was the route from Susegana to Vidor, which is day 7 for me. And that was the one that was along the Piave River.
Yeah.
With the Isola dei Morti.
Yes.
I'm familiar with that, right? That was a island that literally means in English, island of the dead. It was a spot where at the end of World War I, or the Great War, as they called it at the time, the Italians were fighting the Austrians. And there was a battle. It was literally late October of 1918. So it was like a couple weeks before the war ended. The Italian forces had launched an offensive against the Austrians across the Piave River. And I'm a veteran. I'm a former Marine. And so I'm very much attuned to military history. And so they had launched an offensive across the Piave River against the Austrians, and it had basically been a slaughter. And all of these bodies over the next couple of days were washing up on this island on the river, what they call the Island of the Dead. And I just kind of walked up upon it. I didn't really know anything about it. I just walked in and it's got a lot of monuments and memorials, and it's obviously all in Italian. I spent probably an hour just sort of walking around and start trying to read through the various markers and such. And it was just a very moving experience for me because in the American education system, we don't learn much about World War I. right? World War II came along 20 years later and kind of stole World War I's thunder in a way. And so we learned a lot more, at least when I was in school, about World War II. We did about World War One. And we certainly didn't learn anything about the Italian front because there were no Americans there, right? We learned about the Western Front, France, Belgium. And so it was very moving. And I took a lot of pictures. And then later in that day, the town of Vidor actually has its own little section right near downtown that's got a bunch of trenches in it, and it's got a lot of markers. It's a very hilly area, as you know. And so there were a lot of like observation posts back then for the various forces that were in the area. And they do a pretty good job of sort of preserving the old trenches and that sort of thing. And I actually was almost late for dinner, the dinner that Ellen was telling you about that Luca made for us. I was almost late. If I could go back again, that would be the day that I repeated.
What about you, Ellen?
Were we coming into Castelfranco and we were coming along a big drainage ditch, small river, I guess. And we came down out of that into town, and there was a woman in a car who pulled up next to us. She wanted to invite us to her home, which, here you would think, oh God, somebody's trying to kidnap me or lure me to their basement. But we had a schedule to keep to get into, I think we were going into Castelfranco. But she kept saying, oh, come to my house. I'll make you a cold drink. You can sit down. But we really didn't have time to sit down, mainly because I was walking that day and I'm slow. We've done a test for every 100 steps Mike has to take. I have to take 119. So let's just call it 20% more. So we turned it down. But I think I'd like to go back and just go and visit with her with my bad Italian and her, spotty English, and just hang out for a few hours in her living room. I would go back and do that.
It's funny. I'm mentally having to adjust because, I walk through this south to north, you walk north to south. And so for me, I had come into Padua through the Po Valley. So the Camino di Sant'Antonio is very flat from basically Bologna up to Padua. And then the next few days on this route towards Gemona, your last days of walking are also pretty flat. And so in my memory, it's flat, but you see the Alps, the Dolomites, you see them up ahead. And so for me, the most memorable stretch, along with the Piave River, is the walk up to Asolo. You would have been coming down to Asolo through a mountain trail, the castle tower, right? You would have walked right past that and then down into this just very convivial place. That's where I ran into the bulk of my bicyclists. It was a Saturday or a Sunday. They were all out. The entire center of the village was filled with spandex, and they were all having drinks and enjoying a break. But that is a great town, and it's positioned right on one of the best stretches of walking, I think, on this part of the Sant'Antonio.
I remember Asolo very, very vividly because this was after I had my hailstorm experience, and it was kind of a dark sky. And there was sort of rumbling, and I was very nervous. I was like, oh, not again. I can't do this again. I just remember sort of just walking as quickly as I could, right? And I kept my phone in my pocket. I wasn't really taking very many pictures. I can't do this again. And there were lots of people there. I think it also might have been weekend, Saturday or Sunday. But I remember thinking, this is a really cool place, but I can't stop. I have to keep going. I'm going to die if I get hit by another thunderstorm. So that's probably another place that I would want to go back and visit for sure, because I wasn't able to get the full experience.
Well, and you can find wine from Asolo at Trader Joe's.
Good to know. I want to circle back to something you touched on at the beginning of the conversation, Ellen. This is the way of St. Anthony. St. Anthony, he doesn't just help find lost phones. There's a lot more to his story than that. And some people will go and walk pilgrim roads without any particular attachment or consideration of the religious ties. Some people, it's a big motivating factor. You mentioned that you have this affinity for Anthony. What drew you to Anthony, and how did walking on his road connect to that?
As a kid, I learned the Tony, Tony, look around, help me find what can't be found, a prayer. And it works. It may not work immediately, but you do generally eventually find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
It's worked for me a few times. When our kids were small one time, you were out of town for something. And I could not find my credit card anywhere in the house. And my son had put it down the air vent in the floor. I would have never, ever thought to look there, but that's where it was.
He was 4, and Ellen needed to go grocery shopping and needed her credit card to go grocery shopping. And there it was. And the thing is, it didn't go down all the way down. It could have gone all the way down and she would have
Yeah.
never have seen it.
Yeah.
Never
Gone all the way
found
down.
it.
It was just literally sitting just below the
Vent cover.
vent cover itself. It was just sitting there. St. Anthony was very helpful in that situation.
Exactly. I would have never looked, but for some reason, I prayed it and it was like, look in the vent in the kitchen. But this is also a child who tried to stick a fork in an outlet. So I guess I shouldn't be too surprised what he could get up to.
It's a miracle that we all make it out of childhood.
Exactly. And then before we walked the Portuguese in 2024, we flew into Lisbon. And so we visited the church that's built over St. Anthony's birthplace. And, the Portuguese call him St. Anthony of Lisbon. And then the Italians call him St. Anthony of Padua. And there's kind of a rivalry about it. It was almost like finishing the Camino Sant'Antonio to go to his birthplace. It was, kind of a nice end cap the year after to go see that.
And I found, just from my point of view, I didn't know as much about St. Anthony as Ellen did when we started the walk, but obviously there's a lot to see related to him and a lot to learn about his life on that portion of Gemona to Padua. So I found it to be very illuminating to kind of stop in some of the places that we stopped where he had stopped, right?
Yeah, the Campo San Piero to Padua section, which is the last 18 miles or so, that is when he was dying. He wanted to get back to Padua and only made it about 15 miles to the Araceli. And so walking from the Araceli to the Basilica, I mean, it's all urban now. It's all built up around it. But I think that for a lot of people, especially in Italy, doing that last section to complete it for St. Anthony is an important pilgrimage or shorter pilgrimage in Italy for Italians. So that was kind of moving to do that. And then the Basilica is just so gorgeous. The ceiling, and the tomb. There's a priest, Father Mario, he's a Franciscan. He does a novena, but it's actually 13 weeks. He'll do videos in English the weeks leading up to the feast day in June. And then, he talks about different sections of the Basilica, different aspects of St. Anthony's life and mission. And they do it every year. And it's just online through the Basilica website. So yeah, I try to remember to do that every spring.
Mike, you've arrived in Santiago, you've arrived in Rome. Feels unfair to compare those as massive pilgrimage shrines to Padua, but what was it like to finish your walk in Padua?
It was a little lower key, I guess I would say, right? It's always going to be tough to compare arriving anywhere, especially when your first arrival was Santiago de Compostela, right? That's the 800-pound gorilla of pilgrimages, right? That's the dominant pilgrimage that's out there. I found it a little more memorable walking into Padua than I did Rome, because Rome just happened for me just a few weeks ago. But that was so crowded, and you walk through a lot of very urban area before you get to the sort of St. Peter's Square in Rome. So I found Padua to be more memorable from that point of view. The Basilica itself, I mean, obviously it's very difficult to compare any church with St. Peter's, right?
Yep.
In Vatican City. But I found the Basilica itself, as Ellen was just discussing, to be very impressive for a fairly small city like Padua, right? It was good. It's not something that I'll forget for sure. None of the big three, Padua, Rome, and Santiago, are ones that I would ever forget. But again, your first arrival, I think, is the one you're going to remember the most, right? And the rest to come after are slightly anticlimactic. They're just going to be, because you can't really compare them to your first time, right? It's just impossible.
That makes total sense to me. What stood out to me about Padua is it felt, for lack of a better word, more personal. Like going around the tomb of Anthony, you see all of the prayers that have been left by people, all of the pleas for intervention. And then when you walk behind the altar, like I've seen a lot of relics, but the relics of Anthony that they have on display, they have his tongue, they have his vocal cord, his lower jaw. Like, I mean, it's vivid, it's visceral in a way. And that's not what I experience when it comes to James. Like you see the reliquary, the silver reliquary in Santiago, and in Rome, there's certainly plenty of relics, but you're not really engaging with them in that way at St. Peter's. Whereas you get to Padua and you know that you have completed Anthony's journey. And that's a different aspect, a different final note to end on.
That is very true.
And we stayed right across the street. I think it was a convent originally, but it's part of the Franciscans complex there. And so the bells would ring on the hour from the basilica. We were able to go to mass several times. And those are televised. So, I would text my family and friends back home and say, oh, you might see us if you go to the basilica website. But it was just nice to be that close. It was just nice that we finished and we stayed there for 2 nights and we just experienced Padua. We walked around. We went to the coffee shop that's got the famous mint coffee. We walked up and down the narrow streets. It was a cool town. I would definitely go back to Padua and spend some time there.
Well, thank you both. I, again, didn't know if I would find anyone to talk to about the Sant'Antonio, and through good fortune and that great ospitale, I was able to track you down, and I feel fortunate. I guess I should have asked Anthony to help me find you, but maybe he was helping all the while. So I appreciate you taking that chance on walking something that's not very popular, not very developed, and sharing your experiences, because I think it'll be instructive to other people who might be checking it out.
It's exciting to me, at least. It's exciting to do new stuff, to walk new paths, to kind of experience that. Maybe know that you're some of the first folks from outside that area that are doing it. Right. That to me is I like to be a bit of a trailblazer if I can. It was exciting.
Yeah, and once you get out of the big cities, you really see more of a country. You meet people.
Right.
The whole slow travel, you can't get any slower than probably walking with me, but it's just a nice way to see a country. Obviously we want to go see the big museums or the big cities, Venice, Rome, the Colosseum. We definitely went and saw the Colosseum and the Forum, but getting out into the smaller towns is just so rewarding.
If there's one thing that walking in Italy will teach you, it's respect for the destructive power of natural disasters. Nearly every town seems to have been destroyed at least once, like Norcia, by a cataclysmic earthquake. As I pushed northward through the Apennines on the Sant'Antonio, though, my attention turned to landslides. You know that something is either really good, really bad, or just really common if you learn the word for it in a foreign language. This area made me painfully aware of the word frana, or landslide. And in 2023, landslides completely transformed these hills, wiping out roads and farms in a dramatic churning of the earth. Most of those had been caught by the Sant'Antonio folks who managed the GPS tracks, rerouting things. But there was one day when I encountered a definitive roadblock, and I, probably foolishly, managed to circumvent it by climbing to the hilltop, looping all the way around the affected area, and then scrambling back down. It's a staggering thing to see firsthand, the whole earth unspooling beneath you. And it's hard not to get a little itchy when walking along the base of other cliffs and hills, wondering how little it might take to launch another frana into action. And of course, those two powerful forces, earthquakes and landslides, are not disconnected. The former often triggers the latter. So part of what makes this part of Emilia-Romagna so vulnerable is that it's chronically tumbly. Earthquake List has documented 207 earthquakes with a magnitude of 4 or above within 300 kilometers of Emilia-Romagna in just the past decade. Which, I suppose, is not helpful evidence to cite when encouraging pilgrims to consider these newer routes. But hey, nature can get you anywhere. Just think about those fires on the Camino last summer. And what's striking about these towns, as exemplified in the complete rebuilding of Monte Cassino and the recent reopening of the Basilica of St. Benedict in Norcia, and also in the ways so many of these villages and cities have rebuilt their lives from scratch, is the spirit of resilience that runs through it all. Regardless of the potential hazards, despite the past tragedies, these are beloved places. Places that, big or small, are imbued with a deep spirit of community. It's palpable. You feel it when you walk through. These are young pilgrimages, but they are built on deep, deep historical significance. And again, they are worthy of your consideration. That's all for this episode. Thanks again to Paul Granville. You can find him online at paulscamino.com. Thanks as well to Ellen and Mike Leland, who are probably out on some underwalked, brand new route right now. All episodes of the Camino Podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can reach me at CaminoPodcast@gmail.com and through the Camino Podcast Facebook page. And you can support the pod on Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Whitson. Back next week.